Good morning, everyone. We're going to get started because we have a very full agenda today. We have Dr. Burke at the remote location. Good morning, Dr. Burke. We expect Dr. Parker to also join us. He's not there yet, though. And Supervisor Nelson will be here hopefully shortly. We know Supervisor Rutherford will not join us this morning as she's out of town, and Councilmember Buscaino also has an important council meeting this morning, so he will not be with us either. But because we have a very full agenda, I'd like to go ahead and get started. We're going to do this a little bit differently today because we would like to put our reports from our consultants in Washington and Sacramento at the end of the agenda. Normally we take them at the beginning, but we'll put them at the end so that we can get through some of these other things that we have urgency on or that we want to reach today. And we do have written reports from our consultants, so hopefully we will get to them, but if we don't, we do have the written reports. So we'll try to get through this agenda. We'd like to spend approximately 30 minutes on the first item, which deals with the results of the survey that we did, that FM3 did, on the tax measure proposal. So we'll go directly to that item, and we have a report from, who's going to do this report?
Rick Sklarz, if I may, Mayor Pro Tem.
Yes, please go ahead.
So, as you know, the district had engaged the services of FM3 to conduct a poll. The poll was to, and I'll let Mr. Sklarz identify that, to look at the potential public perception regarding a proposed sales tax increase. It was also designed to do a few other things in terms of let us know what the public perception is about the district. And one of the nice things about working with FM3 is they had also conducted a poll in 2001. And so, Mr. Sklarz, if you could go ahead and take it away.
Sure, and I will go through the slides, but as I talk, feel free if you have questions. And I know we have limited time, so I'm going to move a little quickly. I know you have the written materials, so we don't necessarily need to go through text, so we'll skip over that for now. But I do want to just walk through the methodology a little bit, just so everyone's on the same page as we go through the results. So the way we conducted the survey was both online and telephone calls. We wanted to get as many people's opinions as possible. So we used both methodologies. We know more and more people are sort of willing to do things online versus taking an extended phone call to give their opinion. So we do both. We want to get the sample as robust and cumulative as possible, so that's how we did it. We did, based on the district's desire, do an oversampling of African American voters within the district, just to make sure there is a representative sample of African Americans in the survey as well. Survey was conducted in English and Spanish, so we have, again, trying to get as much participation as possible. You can see the dates of interviews. The margin of error, when we're looking at all the sample together, is about 2.5%. It will fluctuate if we start looking at demographic groups or by various counties. The sample margin of error will go up a little bit. And as was mentioned, we did a survey for the district back in 2001, so you'll see some results from that prior survey just to show comparisons as we walk through the research. So, just to give you a bit of a sense overview, part of the research before we even get into the ballot measure question or concept is what do voters, the public in this district know about SCAQMD overall? And we asked this question a sort of mood and context. So just in terms of big picture, how would you rate living in Southern California? You can see overall, we're down a little bit. In 2001, about 84% said it was either excellent or good. Today, that's at 75%. So the excellent numbers come down a bit. But by and large, most people are still generally happy they live in Southern California. You know, maybe there's some things they don't like, but overall, people are generally enjoy living in this region. Just to give you a sense of how that breaks across some of the demographics within the district, You can see, I've highlighted in red here where the excellent number is a little higher, and you can see Latinos are more likely to say excellent, and residents of Orange County are a little more likely to say excellent. So those two groups, a little higher positive number. You can see there's some others that are a little more on the sort of, only fair or poor category, but by and large, most people are still favorable about their communities. Getting into the specific of the district, here you can see the name itself. We tested it 2 ways in the survey. Half of the respondents were asked, do you have a very favorable, somewhat unfavorable, very unfavorable, or do you not know or can't rate South Coast Air Quality Management District, and the other half of the sample were given the acronym AQMD. And what you can see here is the name itself, while among those who have an opinion, is generally favorable. People sort of have a favorable sense of that district if you give them the full name, versus the acronym itself is a little tougher. People don't really know as much. But with the full name, the Air Quality Management District, nearly 4 in 10 are saying favorable, only 17% unfavorable, but you've got a large portion, a plurality, 46%, who say they can't rate it or have never heard of it. So it's not a highly known district. It wouldn't be like asking Caltrans or a larger, bigger, more present state. So it's a little less of a known name in the public. We also asked the question, do you know the name of the government agency responsible for protecting air quality in your area? And again, AQMD comes up only about 1/3 of the time. So again, it's not necessarily something people top of mind, they automatically assume. You can see other people said EPA, there were a few Air Resources Board. So there's not a great sense that this is the district that's in charge of air quality in this part of the state. And then just to sort of get to the next question, which is, have you heard about it? And if they said yes, we asked, well, how, a lot, some, a little, nothing at all. You can say only 7% of our respondents say they've heard a lot about AQMD. So again, it's just a reflection of this is not a highly well-known agency in the public right now. There could be a lot of reasons for that, but it's just a matter of what's going on. It is interesting that, demographically, it does seem to be that there is a little difference in terms of by county. San Bernardino and Orange County residents seem to have a little more awareness of AQMD or heard something about it in recent months. In terms of sort of the big picture issues, just what are the issues? It's not shown on these slides, trying to summarize quickly, but issues like healthcare costs, housing costs, and traffic congestion are the most dominant concerns of people in this district. Those are by far testing in sort of, you see it here, the dark orange here is a very serious problem, the light is a somewhat serious problem. Those other issues are more in the 70% or higher, very serious problems. So those issues are clearly the top problems in this area. But that's not to say that things related to air quality are not. And you can see climate change, 59% say that is a very serious problem, another 18% somewhat serious. So issues related to air quality and pollution certainly rate as high issues. And the next one down, you can see what's interesting today versus 2001, concern about contamination of soil from industry has actually intensified. We've gone from 36% very serious in 2001 to 15% very serious today. So there's a growing concern about pollution-related issues. But on this slide as well, you can see pollution from vehicles. 85% say it's an extremely or somewhat serious problem. Greenhouse gases that cause climate change, again, half saying very serious. And the next slide covers similar territory, but what's notable here is the change over time and a greater recognition of air quality issues. I think overall we're hearing more about climate change and air quality issues overall. So air pollution, what we usually call smog, in 2001 was at 38% very serious. That has increased to 45% today. So a higher intensity about that issue. You can see more people saying very or somewhat as well. Similarly, with air pollution from diesel engines, pollution of drinking water is actually up a good 9 points from where it was in 2001. And then lastly on this list, air quality in my community, 31% very serious, another 34% somewhat serious. So 2/3 saying that's a serious issue. And I think that's a relevant number to sort of just put in the back of your head 65% saying air quality in my community is a serious, very or somewhat serious issue, because that 2/3 number is going to sort of come back again. You're going to see in a few places. Probably don't have time to go through all of these. I broke down in the next couple of slides demographically how concerned these issues are by various ethnicities, and then the next slide are counties. But you can see there's broad, consistent results that regardless of ethnicity, pollution from vehicles or air pollution itself are issues that concern everyone regardless of ethnicity. And on the next slide, similarly, regardless of county, those are top of mind issues. It is notable if you go down the list in the LA County column, the air pollution from diesel engines is at 78%. So concern about diesel engines seems to be a bit higher in LA County versus the 3 other counties. So that's something just to note, whether that's a port-related issue. You know, a lot of those trucks coming in and out of the port, there might be an intensity behind that could be causing it. Some additional information about air quality and what's causing it. So just sort of looking what voters think today versus 2001 when we asked them, is air quality getting cleaner, getting dirtier, staying about the same? So when we ask about the region in general today, you can see we're actually in a better place. 39% say it is cleaner today than it was several years ago. If you look at the bar down from that in 2001, it was 34%. But the net improvement actually is about 10 points. There's a 17-point margin from cleaner to dirtier in the current results, whereas it was only 7-point margin in 2001. So while the numbers may not be fluctuating a huge amount, the margin is getting better, does suggest some progress. It doesn't necessarily say there's a lot of, people think things are tremendously better, but there is a sense of maybe things are incrementally better today than they were in the earlier part of the 2000s. What is a little different today, too, is in looking at the region as a whole, looking prospectively at 2030, you've got about an equal number saying they think it'll be cleaner, an equal number saying about be dirtier, roughly a third on each side, maybe a little more on the dirtier side. But you can also see the dirtier, the 21% in SoCal 230, 2018. I'm sorry, I'm throwing a lot of numbers. It's a little more intense. So people who think things are going to be dirtier, looking forward, have a stronger feeling about that than people who are saying it's going to get a lot cleaner. But again, these numbers are better than where they were earlier part of 2000, so there is some suggestion of people think things are at least going in the right direction on this issue. Similarly, with your community in 2030, you have the same sort of movement. Again, not necessarily that things are getting much cleaner. There's still a concern about evenly distributed, but things are at least progressing. We were, minus 12, 22% cleaner, 34% dirtier in 2001. But today, we're now, that margin is only 4 points. So it's improving, may not be where we want it to be, but at least we're getting better. And then your community today, you can see not a whole lot of change there. In fact, people sort of feel roughly the same about their own communities today versus where it was in 2001. In terms of concerns of what air pollution does, the consequences of it, by far, public health impacts are the deepest problem. It is the worst problem. You can see here, both this year and back in 2001, 3/4 said the public health problems associated with air pollution are the worst aspect of it. The other ones, the second, worst aspect, today it's climate change. Now it's worth noting we didn't include climate change in the 2001 survey, hadn't yet risen to an issue of public really discussion. So you can see that's really taken off in a way that, when you talk about plant life, that's down. Plant life in 2001, the effect of air pollution on plant life has gone down 20 points. And the issue of dirty brown haze, that's down as well from where it was in 2001. So progress on some issues is being made. The public health issue still remains the major consequence. In terms of emissions, again, the trucks, vehicles, tailpipes, all these issues remain highly salient and highly concerning to the public. Oil refineries remain an issue. interestingly, the one at the bottom, power plants, that's actually increased. So 44% today say that's a major factor in air pollution, where it was 34% a major factor in 2001. So more concern about air pollution from the power plants. And then again, just showing some numbers by county, these 4 effects, and you can see consistently concern about diesel trucks and buses is very high in each of the 4 counties. The oil and chemical refineries, again, LA County, a higher number there. Again, the port, the refineries by the port may play into a factor there as well. And then tailpipes from cars, a little stronger in LA County and Orange County as well. Okay, so getting into the sort of incentive program and possible concept of a ballot measure. So didn't include the text, but we have it in the report if you need it. What we basically did is describe how AQMD tries to incentivize the private sector to switch over to cleaner forms. And in general, we gave them a summary of that and asked the public, do you favor or oppose those programs? And overwhelmingly, 80% say they favor the AQMD investing in those types of incentive-based programs. And you can see 57% strongly favor it. That's a high degree of intensity on these types of questions. Only 9% strongly oppose. So the idea of incentivizing private sector to invest in clean technology is something the public definitely thinks is important. We then described here the issue of funding for these types of programs, AQMD's projection of how much it will need, the $1 billion amount over the next 15 years, the fact that it only received $300 million from the state to do these programs last year, and that there is no mandated funding to continue going forward. So we presented that. Given that information, do you sort of support the legislature giving the authority of AQMD to go to the ballot to ask voters for a potential funding source? Overwhelmingly, or again, we have 2/3, 65%, and that's sort of why I sort of brought that number up earlier. 65% favor that concept, and I think it's important, the reason I said earlier to keep that 65% in your head is local concern about air quality. The public sort of is concerned about air quality, but when it comes to funding measures, particularly ballot measures, what impact is it going to have on my community? LA County, Orange County, these are all big areas, the Inland Empire, but locally, how is this going to benefit or impact my area? So if there's a local concern and the public sees these types of programs as beneficial to where they live, that usually can translate in support. And that 65% who are concerned about their own local community, we now see 65% of this sample is also saying they favor the legislature, saying, AQMD, if you want to pursue it, we'd be supportive of that. So it's something to sort of note. And again, you can see we have better than 2-to-1 strongly favor to strongly oppose, just to give you a sense of the intensity behind it. Walking through some of these demographics, and I'm trying to be brief, so I'm not going to spend too much time here, but you can see not a major gender gap. A lot of it, public policy issues, there sometimes can be, but not so much on this issue. And the next one, you can see there is a partisan difference, and that's not inherently surprising. Democrats particularly, but independents as well in this part of the state are going to be more supportive of a potential funding source or possibly any action by the state legislature. Republicans are going to be less so. Age-wise, this is also very consistent with other types of research. Particularly younger voters tend to be more sensitive to climate change issues. If you can attach something that related environmentally, that tends to provoke a stronger response with younger voters. So that may be what we're picking up here. Just to give you a sense, a little more, another slice of the data, in particular, it is younger women who are most supportive of this. You can see the men, younger men are more supportive as well than their older counterparts, but the younger women are by far the most supportive. It's 77% who favor this proposal. And then by ethnicity, you can see voters of color are going to be more supportive than whites in this area. White voters, are going to be more Republican, so there's some correlation there. but notably Asian Pacific Islanders were expressing the strongest support at over 77% there in favor. And then by county, just to show you by county, again, LA County, the strongest supporters of it at 68%. But the other 4 counties, it's not as though they oppose it. There are solid majorities in each of the 3 other counties who are in favor of this idea. And then lastly, if you have children or not, how do you feel about it? And what we're seeing here is those who do not have children, 50% favor, that's a correlation with age. Younger people are saying, we support this, they're less likely to have younger children. But what you do see is not a whole difference between people who have kids in the home or not have older children. Both are, there's about a 10-point difference there. The older will sort of reflect the older demographic as well. So then we did conceptually ask, would you favor a quarter-cent sales tax to fund these types of programs? And here you can see support is lower at 54% who favor it. Now I don't want to sort of expand on this and say this is, what people would vote on election day. Obviously, a lot of things go into that, so I can't necessarily say this is a one-to-one correlation of how a measure would look. But this gives you a sense of, just briefly, they haven't really heard much about this yet in the course of the survey, but here's where they are initially when you've given them this type of information. And basically what I showed you in terms of the previous demographics holds true with this. It's going to be Democratic voters who are the most supportive, those under the age of 40 are more supportive, LA County and voters of color are going to be the strongest supporters. The next few slides have a lot of data, and I'll try to summarize them as quickly as possible. But what we did in the course of the survey is say there's a number of ways AQMD could address air quality issues through its incentive-based programs. Here are a number of those programs. Do you support or oppose that specific program? And what we found is getting school buses, trucks that are diesel fueled to near zero or zero emission vehicles is sort of the core thing that voters would like to see, and particularly the school buses. And again, this probably goes back to public health, particularly sympathetic our children's. So making sure school buses are clean and not using diesel fuel seems to be the strongest aspect of this program. And it's notable, I've highlighted here, but over 60% are saying they strongly support. That's a really intensely high number in these types of surveys. It's not necessarily the norm to see something that high. So the use of funds to provide cleaner school buses is something that really resonates with the public. Several other of these are very strong as well. Upgrading Metrolinx's rail system to be cleaner, making improvements at the port, move cargo through cleaner sources, that also works as well. The next slide sort of does the same sort of thing. We have more potential programs. Some of these sound similar, they're slightly different. We tried different wording to explain what the program is to see if they get a different reaction. But by and large, the public is supportive of these programs as a way to address clean air issues. We also asked sort of conceptual questions of, do you agree or disagree with this statement that, broadly getting away from the specific concept of a funding mechanism, but do you support or agree with this general attitude? And so reducing traffic congestion is an effective way to reduce air pollution emissions that cause climate change. 84% of this district's voters agree with that. You can see a little higher with Latinos at 64% who strongly agree with that. So it's sort of I think it's a common sense thing, but we want to make sure people buy into that concept that traffic and air quality are related to each other, that affecting one has an effect on the other. Next couple are also sort of getting zero emission vehicles into the traffic world is a better way to deal with it. Just one note I want to make on this, and it's the third item down. I realize it's hard to read. So the third one down and then the second one up from the bottom are similarly worded, but the issue that it's more expensive to deal with health problems associated with air pollution, et cetera, is at 74% agree. The other one is, at the second from the bottom, is more expensive to deal with the impact of emissions that cause climate change. And here again, and that's at 63%, a 10-point difference. And here you can again see health issues more resonate with the public than just climate change. Not to say climate change isn't important, but the direct health impact of air quality stirs a deeper effect on the public than addressing climate change. So it's a nuance, but it's something that resonates in a way that may be useful to know. We did some information to try to communicate the issue and the problem and why AQMD is considering investing in these programs. And again, there's a lot of text here, and I'm mindful that I'm probably running over too long. But the next several slides, what we found is it is the public health issues related to air quality that really strikes the public as alarming. We gave them a series of factual statements, and we worked with staff to make sure these were accurate. We didn't want anything in here that was not correct. So we provided the public with these statements and asked them, is this an extremely, very, somewhat, or not a serious concern in your mind? And what you see here is the level of concern based on these statements and sort of the health-related impacts of air pollution really strike the public as problems. Just the first one here, the impact, long-term exposure cause asthma, emphysema, heart and lung stress, cancers. So the health impacts of air quality really do affect the public. And you can see on the next couple slides the same sort of statement. The one highlighted here is about the potential loss of federal highway dollars if the district doesn't meet certain air quality regulations. 2/3 are concerned about that. And then this next slide, you can see the numbers start to come down a bit. And what I would say here is this is more process related, and we get into explanations of AQMD lacks the authority to regulate certain types of emission producing vehicles. And what I think that sort of, it's not to say that's not important to the public, but you start talking about what is the direct impact of air quality versus a government agency and how it goes about addressing these issues, starts to be less of a big concern to the public. So it's just something to be mindful of. Again, we sort of tried to emulate in this survey what a public outreach education program would look like. So we tested a series of statements, sort of building off a lot of what the survey has already done in terms of what the problem is, how AQMD is seeking to resolve it, and what the benefits would be for the public. And again, lots of text here, so I don't want to go through all this while you can read it yourselves. But each of those sort of parentheticals explains the gist of what that statement says. So we tested a number of them. And again, what we found here is there's sort of two core elements of what the public responds to. One is, let's get trucks, diesel-based trucks, to switch over. We like that idea. We think it makes sense. It can make a big difference in terms of air quality. And the other one was the health impact. What impact does air pollution and not addressing it have on us? And if we do address it, what benefits will our communities get by having cleaner air? And here you can see, I've shown the very convincing percentage, but the question is very or somewhat convincing reason to favor the incentive programs. All of these messages are basically 70% or higher in terms of how convincing they are as a reason to support AQMD's incentive programs. I've shown the very convincing so you can get a sense. When we do this type of research, we're usually looking for statements in the very convincing category that are sort of around 35% or higher. Those tend to be the most persuasive ones. And here you can see there are a number of them. But again, it's the trucks-related statement and the health-related statement that really are resonant with the public here. And they are across virtually all of the different ethnic groups, gender, as well as county. And so all of them work pretty well consistently with this district. We did, to try to provide balance and not make sure people didn't feel like we were trying to sell them something, provide the other half. So we had statements that said, here's why we don't support this and why we think this is a bad idea. And some of it goes to sort of, we can't afford higher taxes. AQMD isn't a place where we should be paying more taxes to. That's a pretty powerful statement in this district. Concern about wasteful spending and pensions, which is sort of a fundamental issue that we know is out there. And then the concept that this is unfair, that we, the public, should be passing this. So we then sort of go through this exercise. I showed you the initial one. We asked this 3 times after people hear positive information and then after these negatives. And you can see there's some fluctuation, but fundamentally attitudes don't really change dramatically over the course of the survey. We've got 63% at the end of the survey who still favor letting AQMD go to the ballot with the state legislature's authority. And then secondarily, the vote on a potential sales tax measure, again, we've got a majority, the started at 54, we end up at 54 in terms of being in favor of it. 4 and 10 remain opposed, as was the beginning. So that is the summation of it, and I will sort of stop there and take some questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sparks. And are there questions now from Dr. Burke or Dr. Parker? I'll make a comment. I think one of the most striking things out of this is how few people know who we are and what we do. So that speaks volumes to, that we need more public outreach, we need to do more to let people know what we're doing. So I think that part of the survey is certainly instructive for our public outreach purposes. Yes, I want to welcome Dr. Parker. Thank you for joining us. And we have Supervisor Nelson there. I think so.
Yes.
Yes, good morning. So any questions about the survey results for Mr. Sklars? Any questions of any nature, any comments of any nature?
Just, Madam Chair, just curious if the requirement to pass a sales tax measure is 2/3 is a favorable result, a result that's less than 2/3.
Supervisor, we did send out a confidential memorandum on that. Did you get that yesterday?
I understand that's why I asked the question. Let me repeat. If the requirement is 2/3 for a vote of the people, then do we then correlate a favorable response to a poll would need to be a 2/3 response? Does that make sense? Since we require a 2/3 vote, we'd earlier said we would take certain actions if the results of the poll were, quote, favorable. And there was some discussion about what favorable meant, but in light of the law, does the favorable definition comply with what we need for a vote, or does favorable mean 50+1?
I'm going to ask Barbara to answer that because I think there's some questions with what would be required, some legal questions about what is going to be required in a final vote. There's some cases that are pending, some cases that have been decided that raise some questions about what would be required. Barbara or Bay, either one of you want to respond on that?
So Supervisor, I think you probably understood that depending on how the matter gets to the ballot, it may be a 2/3 vote or it may be a majority vote. I think your question is, if we assume for purposes of this discussion that it's a 2/3 vote, does the committee feel or the consultant feel that the polling results are sufficient to constitute a favorable result from the poll if we assume for purposes of this discussion that it's a 2/3 vote? And that's not a legal question, that's more of a policy and polling question.
What I'll say about this survey is I don't think it replicates what a ballot measure far off in the future, however that looks, really would look like. As you may sort of know, ballot measures are very sort of worded in a specific way. You have 75 words on the ballot to explain sort of the whole concept of it, and that often becomes a big issue in the sort of way people vote. And what this survey did was much more, here's an idea, do you favor or oppose it? We didn't ask how you would vote on it. We didn't necessarily give them the sort of the 75-word treatment that a normal ballot measure would have. So I don't want to say that what we saw in this survey in terms of favor or oppose a potential sales tax to fund these programs is indicative of what would happen on election day several years out based on however this gets put on the ballot.
Does that answer some of your questions, Supervisor?
Yeah, I mean, as to the first part, look, the board, please understand, you all know I have an opinion, but setting that aside, whatever decision the board makes, they make. I just want to make sure we're not crossing lanes and taking one set of assumptions is that, hey, 51% is what we're going to use to green light doing something, and then we're going to walk into an arena where a 66 and 2/3 vote's going to be needed. We should just be aware of that, whatever we decide to do. As to the second item, I realize this is not a ballot poll. And again, I've shared my opinions. I won't do it twice. I would suggest that absent sort of what you could expect on a tax-related pushback, I would suggest this is probably a high watermark, and that's why I'm kind of making the comments that we got to be realistic about what we're looking at. If this unchallenged is about as good as you're going to get, and we get into an arena with 2/3, that could be a problem. And you know, we should be aware of what we're getting ourselves into. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chairman?
Yes, Dr. Berg.
You know, last night my wife bought a book, which I found very interesting. It was a book by Roland Speedy Curtis, who is a well-known black photographer in the 60s in Los Angeles. And it was a collection of his photographs. And I looked at the cover and I immediately thought about Supervisor Nelson and this issue. Because on the cover of this book, which I am going to get a copy for Supervisor Nelson.
I am anxiously awaiting that.
So the picture is of a black protester holding a sign saying, "Let poor people speak for themselves." And I think that's the crux of the issue here. People have been speaking for poor people. I was poor at one time. I think it was yesterday. But, you know, and I found that people spoke for me and said what I wanted and said what I liked and said what I needed and said what I should be wearing and driving and eating and all those things. I'm on this issue, number one, I'm into this futurist thing so heavy nowadays that I'm not sure that buying trucks is even our answer. Okay, I'm in support of this tax, but I think we ought to really be looking at all. I had another epiphany day before yesterday. I bought my granddaughter a little red electric car, okay? And she drives that through my house like it's the Irwindale Speedway. She's 3 years old, right? So the day before yesterday, Autumn came to pick up her daughter. And she looks at Isabella and she said, you know, the interesting thing is, Isabella will never really drive a car. And I stood there for a second, and I was trying to figure, and then I realized she was absolutely right. By the time Isabella gets to be driving age, there's going to be self-driving cars for everybody. So we're hung up this morning on KNX radio. They announced the second major manufacturer who's putting on the road self-driving trucks. Now, why would I go buy a new diesel truck if in 5 years they're going to have self-driving electric trucks which will compact the traffic rate, increase the capacity of our freeways, and clean the air. So I'm all for moving ahead on this, but I think that we really need to think about what we're talking about here and how it really fits in with the future of the counties that we represent. That's my epiphany for this morning. And you get your book, Sean.
I'm waiting, and I'll second Dr. Burke's motion that we table all this vehicle conversion stuff until such a time that cleaner vehicles are available. No more switching out vehicles.
Well, Madam Chair, I guess I get a chance to speak
It's
last.
Dr. Parker.
I think that when I saw this, I read it several times because it's just like studying for a math test in Boolean algebra once that I did. I had no idea what it was all about and probably still don't, but at least I wanted to get a good grade in it, so I read the chapters 3 times and finally made an A in the class. Now, I still can't tell you what Boolean algebra itself is about today, but I did make an A in the class. In reading all of this, I began to realize that what we were really sampling is the things that we have been given the responsibility to do, and that is to come up with measures to clean the air. And how do we go about doing that? Well, rather than rehashing our AQMP, we said we needed funds in order to do it with. And how do we get those funds? The only way that we can get money realistically is from the federal government or from taxes or the state governments themselves. Those amounts are not enough for what we say we need. And then therefore we as a board has been given the responsibility to come up with procedures and methods and ways of how we can supplement that. We certainly do not have the right, and we should not have the right, and that is to just go out and tell people this is what you're going to pay. We all recognize right now we're paying 12 cents more for those of us who actually have to put gasolines in cars 12 cents a gallon more, that we really didn't have a lot to say about it, but we're having to pay it. To the extent of what we're doing now is what Dr. Burke said just a moment ago, let people speak for themselves. Let them determine what it is that they want to do in order for what we have done, and that is the way that we have said that we wanted to go about helping to clean the air. And if we don't do that, I think that we are not really doing our job. We don't come up with a way and tell people we need money and then don't tell them how we can go about getting it in order to be able to do those kinds of things, whether or not it's incentives or whatever it may be. I do believe that people should have a right to say so. I don't believe that government should just be able to impose their will upon people all the time, even though we have a representative form of government. That being said, I won't, go on and on and on. I think all we're really saying is that if we found a way, and to speak to my dear colleague, which I have a lot of respect for his ideas, Supervisor Nelson, that if we found a way to say to people that you need to now determine whether or not you're going to assist us with this, not 100%, but to some extent, and to raise this money in order to be able to clean the air, we should let them basically say so within the region of what we're saying. Now, if we came out, as I said, a lot of people don't know who we are. 40% of the people said they've never heard of the AQMD or, South Coast Air Quality Management District. I thought that was a very interesting question. Ask it both ways and see what the results are. And that is a issue. That is a concern. But those that had, we really overwhelmingly supported itself to the extent, as you say, 50 or 51% or 65 or 70% or whatever, and let them speak. If they don't, then I'd love to be able to have the right to say the people have spoken. Let them basically have that right itself to speak for themselves. So I do believe that we should go forward. I recognize some taxing is really a non-starter to talk about. People should not have to pay taxes, but then why were we created? We were created to find ways to clean the air. So I would be supportive of what I've seen today of going forward and to debate it further.
So Dr. Parker, let me interrupt here for a moment because I do want to move this along. We have several bills that we need to look at as well. And I know our
Madam Chair?
entire board wants to look at this, so I would suggest that we push this forward to the entire board. Yes, Dr. Burke.
You know, when I came to AQMD, however long ago that was, 20, 24, 25, 26 years ago, whatever it was, we ran, 2 years after I was here, we ran a poll by the same polling company about how many people knew about AQMD. And in those days, it was 17%. So in the period of time that I've been here, it went from 17% to 37%. Well, and that, quite frankly, is without a lot, practically nothing being utilized, resources being utilized to move the needle on our identification. So I think it's important that we continue to press forward in a more aggressive manner to let people know who we are and what we do.
Thank you. I'm going to ask if there's any public comment here at this point so we can keep moving along. Oh, no one wants to talk about this here. Anyone there in the remote locations?
Oh, I'm here.
I'd look for a motion to move this up to the board level so that they can see the results of the survey and just participate in this discussion. They expressed an interest at our last board meeting.
Second,
All right, we have a motion. I guess I made the motion. Dr. Parker seconded it. So can we have a roll call vote, please?
Dr. Burke? Supervisor Nelson?
Just so we're clear, as long as we're just voting to move this to the board, I'm certainly in favor of that. Thank you.
That's a yes.
Dr. Parker?
Yes.
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 Mayor Pro Tem Mitchell?
Yes.
Motion passes 4-0.
Okay. Let's move to the bills that we need to take a look at. And we have some bill deadlines as well, so we need to move on these. And I think, Philip, you're going to talk about these. And very brief report. I think everybody's read the agenda items.
Okay, sure. The first bill is AB 2548 by Friedman. Good morning, Madam Chair, committee members. Basically, this bill would authorize LA Metro coordinating with the South Coast AQMD to jointly adopt a commute benefit ordinance that requires covered employers within LA County with 50 or more full-time employees to offer a pre-tax option related to commuting costs and deducting that from their federal tax, from the taxable wages as allowed by federal law. However, AQMD already administers a Rule 2202 that it's a commute trip reduction program that covers employers in the South Coast with 250 or more employees at a work site. And the employers have multiple options under that rule, including the one proposed by this bill. So this bill could eliminate some of those extra options that employers have in reducing the compliance options. It also, because it reduces from 250 down to 50, it includes a lot more employers. And if AQMD were to be involved in administering this program, it would substantially increase AQMD's staffing and resource needs. So AQMD is recommending, staff is recommending that the bill be amended to basically eliminate reference from AQMD in the bill so that the district is not involved in the creation or administration of this proposed new program, and make sure that any new program is harmonized with Rule 2202 to make sure that the current employers with 250 more employees are still covered by the current Rule 2202. And so therefore it's an oppose unless amended recommended position by staff.
And the author did not consult us, I'm assuming.
Not in advance, no. And we've contacted the office later after the fact.
I see, okay. Any discussion on this? Okay, I'll look for a motion. Do we need to go to public comment on each of these, Barbara?
Yes.
Okay, any public comment on this particular bill? Seeing none. Public comment from your remote locations?
None.
None, okay. May I have a motion on this item, please?
I'll move the item.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Dr. Burke? Dr. Burke?
Aye.
Supervisor Nelson?
Aye.
Aye.
Who's it?
Thank you. Dr. Parker?
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Mitchell? Motion passes 4-0.
And now go to AB 2008. Who's doing this one? Monica.
Yes. Good morning, Madam Chair and committee members. This bill would allow all Carl Moyer grant funds to be exempt from taxable income for the purchase of new zero and/or low-emission engines. Currently, recipients are required to pay taxes on these grants. The current draft of the bill does not appear to exempt all of the project types available under the program from being taxed. Staff proposes amending the bill so that it exempts all Carl Moyer grant funds from taxable income. Thus, staff recommends a support with amendments position on this bill.
Thank you. Any comments on this bill?
Move the item.
Thank you, I'll second it. Any public comment from here? No, seeing none, okay. Roll call, please, then.
Dr. Burke?
Aye.
Supervisor Nelson?
Aye.
Dr. Parker?
Tiger.
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Mitchell?
Aye.
Motion passes 4-0.
Next one is SB 1144, and Philip,
Push
you're
that
gonna
one.
report
We're
that.
gonna push that bill.
We're gonna
Pull that
table
for
that
now.
one and pull it until later, because we're working on that one.
Yes.
AB 2506, this is a bill by Autumn Burke.
Yes. So this bill, AB 2506, would require, beginning January 1st, 2020, that at least 30% of newly purchased vehicles with a gross vehicle weight rating of 19,000 pounds or more, purchased by the Department of General Services and other state entities for the state fleet, be near zero emission. This bill would work in concert with those requirements, the existing requirements to increase the portion of the state fleet operate on cleaner alternative fuels. And overall, the bill would help South Coast reduce diesel particulate matter and NOx emissions, and to improve public health and facilitate attainment of federal air quality standards. However, to help ensure these benefits of the bill and to allow for flexibility, staff simply suggests adding to the bill a definition for near zero emission vehicles, which would be a vehicle that meets or emits less than CARB's optional low NOx emission standard of 0.02 grams per brake horsepower hour. So thus staff recommends a support with amendments.
Thank you. Any comments on this one?
I realize what the intent is, but do we have any information as to what happens if the need for the vehicle, there's not a vehicle available? I mean, we'd have to guess, but if you're out with some large truck and there just isn't one made, what do they do then? Do we know?
Yeah, Supervisor Nelson, on the existing language of the statute provides that the Department of General Services is required to conduct a technological assessment of the technology, and then shall, if they're unable to meet the needs of the state while meeting the requirements of this section, the department reports that to the legislature and presumably and then this section would then be inoperative.
Okay, they get a waiver of some sort.
Yes.
I don't know how big you have to be. I don't know where the cutoff is at 19,000 pounds. Sounds like a pretty significant piece of equipment to me, but what I don't know would fill volumes.
Phil, do you want to, what is that, Class 8, Class 9? Matt?
Six or not, probably.
It's Class 6 and up. Okay. Does that help? Okay.
Sure. It sounds like Barbara says there's a procedure for a waiver, so that's really all that would be helpful to them, I suppose. Thank you.
Any other comments from my committee members? Seeing none, any public comment? Nothing here. Any public comment?
Sorry.
Sorry. I'm sorry.
Harvey raised his hand.
None here.
Oh, yeah, please come forward, Harvey.
I don't have much to say, I just think that there should be zero emission vehicles and the percentages should be 80%. I mean,
Thank you. We're gonna get there before long. Okay, any comments from your remote locations? Any public comment?
None.
None. I'll look for a motion on this item.
Second.
Who made the motion? Sorry. Did I make the motion?
I did. Parker.
I'll make the motion. And Dr. Parker will second. May we have a roll call, please?
Dr. Burke,
Yes.
Supervisor Nelson,
Yes?
Dr. Parker,
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Mitchell.
Yes.
Motion passes 4-0.
I wonder what happens if Dr. Burke opposes a bill that her daughter
I can't go home. That's easy.
Okay, we have just a few minutes. We can, Lisa, go to the next item, which is proposed amendments to our legislative goals and objectives. Objections.
Good morning,
Okay.
Madam Chairman and members of the committee. I'll make this very brief. Our recently adopted AQMD 2018 state and legislative goals and objectives, board member Dr. Joe Liu had proposed 2 amendments, one to the federal side and one to the state side. We coordinated with Dr. Liu, and the amendments are in your packet. The first affects the federal side, which just simply amends it to say oppose legislation that conflicts with the district's attainment goals. And the second proposed change is with regard to state goals and objectives, and it simply clarifies support legislation that promotes energy efficiency and demand reduction. Staff is supportive of this change, and we recommend approval.
Okay. So any comments about this?
Madam Chair, my only comment would be this. Although I appreciate Joe in particular and Joe's desires, if you read what he's suggesting on the Clean Air Act, it's basically oppose legislation that conflicts with our attainment goals. Well, if our attainment goals are based on federal statutes and the federal statutes change, I think if I'm reading this correctly, Joe would like to oppose the federal statute changing rather than just stick with the goal being meet the federal requirement. So basically you'd want to oppose the feds changing the requirement? I mean, isn't our goal just to meet the requirement?
Well,
I think there's 2 issues at play though here. One is recent state law that prevents the state from backsliding. Barbara, maybe you can speak to that.
Well, so it's not completely clear to me whether Dr. Liu meant that or not. I had assumed that it meant, for example, any kind of legislation that would, for example, make it more difficult for us to regulate in the motor vehicle area than it already is, or something of that sort. I think what you're suggesting is if the federal statute is somehow changed so that the attainment goal is not the same as it was before, does he mean we would oppose that? And I can't answer that. Perhaps we should inquire with Dr. Liu when we bring that to the board.
right, we can, you're asking us to determine what Dr. Liu's intent was, and I think that's a good issue you brought up, Supervisor. We could vote on the second of these that we would agree on, and table the first one and move it to the board for further discussion, or we can table it and bring it back here after we've discussed the issue with Dr. Liu. There's different options, what would you like to do?
Madam Chair, I have a question also. Why do we have to make an amendment to our AQMD when all legislation that is being introduced, comes before a committee and then goes before the board. Why should we make something precluding us from being able to have that option to be able to, oppose it or agree with it when it comes up, as we've done today? I don't understand, and I agree with you, maybe it's something that should come back, but I don't understand why we have to basically put the entire board. The board has already agreed on the AQMP, and any other legislation that comes up, we have an opportunity to review it and to vote on it or to make comments about it. So I would suggest that, as you have stated, that this matter itself be withdrawn and brought back so that it will be clarification as to why that is even necessary to do.
All right, then I think, it is already 10 o'clock. We do need to close up here. Why don't we table this and we'll bring it back again? It seems we need some further discussion on it. We need to clarify with Dr. Liu what his intent was. So if that's agreeable to the committee members, I will move this, table it, or postpone it until our next legislative committee meeting and have it brought back to us then. Is that acceptable?
Second.
All right. Do we need a roll call on that, or is that just a procedural matter?
That can be done by the chair.
Okay, the chair will do that. Then we have still public comment. This is on an item that is not on our agenda, and we have received a comment on something that is not on the agenda. Seeing anyone jumping forward?
Harvey.
Harvey, oh, sorry.
I just think that the district show support De Leon's bill for at least 100% solar renewables by 2045, and that should encourage that at least a date of 2025 or 2030 should be used for the state. And that's 100, I think it's.
SB 100,
Yes.
brand new, just came out in the last couple of days.
Much
Thank
more
you.
aggressive.
Thank you for that, Harvey. We'll take note of that. And, right, and thank you to our consultants for listening to our entire committee meeting this morning. So we know what's going on here. And thank you for your written reports, and we will have you tune in with us next time, and hopefully we can get a verbal report that updates your written reports at the next meeting. That concludes our business for this morning, so I will adjourn this meeting until April 13th. Thank you very much.